Rose was a sweet, beautiful, beloved grandmother who amazed me at how she just accepted that she was dying until the end. Her pulse was steady and her blood pressure was dropping. It was only a matter of time. I asked her if she needed anything, and she looked my way and stated, "You've come to get me, haven't you?" I told her no, she wasn't going anywhere for tests today. She smiled sweetly and said, "I'm not talking to you, sweetheart." And I realized she was looking over my shoulder. She closed her eyes and was never alert again. She died about 10 minutes later. My father died of pancreatic cancer. He was so weak he couldn't lift his head up off the pillow. The nurse said he didn't have long. My mother and my 3 brothers were all there when all of a sudden my dad sat up, a look of pure joy on his face. No pain. He lifted his face up to the ceiling, looking from side to side, lifted his hands up smiling, then fell back on the bed, and he was gone. Coming out of his room, my brothers and I said, if you didn't believe in God before Dad died, you would now. For a week before, he didn't have the strength to move himself. We don't know if he saw family, angels, or the face of God, but we know beyond a shadow of a doubt, my dad saw something that we could not. A couple of days before my mother died, she was telling me about the angels in her room. She pointed upward toward different areas of the ceiling and described them. Just seconds before she died, I was sitting at her bedside holding her hand. She had been unresponsive since the evening before. She took her hand out of mine and held it upwards towards where she had been pointing at the angels, then quit breathing. There I am, at the side of his bed praying, and my grandpa sits up and starts to get out of bed. I said, "Where are you going?" He could not walk. I thought he had forgotten. All he said is, "The light." I said, "Is the light in the kitchen bothering you? I'll turn it off." He said, "No, I got to get to the light." I knew right then he was going to die and was ready to go. He died the next morning, with all of us who loved him standing around his bed. I used to be a CNA. Late one evening, one of my widowed female residents was especially happy and animated and refused to go to bed. At one point, I asked her what she was doing out of bed, and she told me that she was packed because her husband was coming to get her. The afternoon when I got to work, I found out she had passed away overnight. My mom's sister was stricken with diphtheria at age 3. This was back in the 30s, even before my mom was born. She was extremely sick, and my grandmother swears that one day she saw a beautiful little girl wearing a white dress dancing in circles around their well outside the yard. She says every time she walked out to the porch, she saw this little girl, and that she was the only one that could see her. My aunt died that night. It still gives me chills. My great-grandmother was on her deathbed. My family and I were there. I was just 6 years old. Everyone left the room, and I was alone with her. She sat up in bed, raised her hand to the ceiling. She said, "Precious Master," laid down, and passed away. The last week when my mom was dying at home, she kept asking the hospice people to get her clothes out so she could decide what to wear. She insisted on a slip, nice underwear, and everything. After a while, they kind of tired and would try to redirect her. She would say over and over, "But you don't understand. My dad is coming to get me in a wagon." In a few days, I guess he did. My grandmother passed 6 years ago. I was at work when it happened. She passed in her home while in hospice care. For days she had been asking for Jesus to come and get her. She would say it every day in her last days. Finally, on the final day, she was laying in her bed, and she turned and told my mom and siblings that she was about to leave them. All of a sudden, she lifted up her arms in the air and stared at the ceiling as if she was looking at someone. She points her fingers and says, "Bye, y'all. I'm going by myself." Then it became hard for her to breathe, and she finally turned her head to the wall and passed. My father had cancer. A bleeding ulcer ended his life. The day before he died, I sat by his bed. He was looking toward the door. "It's beautiful," he said. "Can you see that?" He looked so happy. A priest came in to administer last rites. He looked at him and said, "Oh, thank you, like he'd been cleared for takeoff. He was 64. One of my mother's 2 older brothers was dying. He had been in and out of it for some time. Then he became very lucid and told their mother that he had been on both sides of the river and said how beautiful it was. He mentioned seeing his dad, grandparents, and an uncle. A short time later, he said, "I have to go now. They're ready to help me across." He died shortly after. I recently had a young woman who was dying with a mild case of terminal restlessness. I was at the home when she was talking to me, then suddenly she opened her eyes, looked at me, and asked, "Why is it when I open my eyes, all the people go away?" I told her the people were there for her, and it was okay to go with them. She very peacefully said, "Okay, that's what I'll do then." She passed away 10 minutes later. My mom and dad were married for 54 years. My mom died of cancer, and 6 months later, my dad died of heart failure. My dad was totally unresponsive and had an oxygen mask on. All of a sudden, he sat straight up and his eyes opened really wide, and he had a smile on his face like a kid at a carnival. My sister said, "Dad, do you see Mom?" He nodded yes, and died. My mother passed from leukemia. In her last days, I was sitting next to her bed, and she told me that her father, who had passed 10 years before, was standing at her bedside. He said to her not to be frightened, and that he would be there to take her to her grandparents when it was time. She had her hand up off of the bed. I said, "What are you doing with your hand?" She said he was holding her hand. I will never forget that moment, and the day before she died, she told me that she would always be with me.